Optimizing the new super elastic multi-force arch wire technology. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Sonia Palick from Woodstock, Ontario, Canada. I'm really looking forward to sharing some early insights with you about this new technology. Let's get started. Our key learning objectives in this short webinar are to share with you why SmartArch is an ideal initial arch wire, to talk about how I'm using it in my practice, and consider issues that no arch wire can fix for us in orthodontics. I'm going to go into a bit of my rationale for early light elastics, and I will touch on the importance of early molar movement to get control of your case. I've been in practice for over 20 years, and clinicians and teachers have respectfully and repeatedly insisted that you could use anything to start moving the teeth. But I beg to differ. Not all arch wires are created equal. So why start with SmartArch? Let's look at the rationale for this approach. Given the option to move all of the teeth simultaneously, or only a few teeth, there is almost no situation where we would not choose to move all of the teeth from the very start. Anchorage considerations have to be rethought considerably. And I would go one step further to say that treatment planning decisions will be impacted because we are just simply capable of moving teeth in ways that we had concluded were not possible before SmartArch. The initial force levels programmed into SmartArch most closely approximate ideal physiologic force levels required by individual tooth groups. This is measured when the teeth are engaged concurrently, and you can find the table with all the values in this webinar 1 of this series. The 014 NiTi does not come close to the force required to move molar teeth. Again, we have always done it this way, so we have to realize that all of the ways that teeth behave with an 014 are related to arch wires that are not providing optimal forces, just forces, either too much or too little, and the consequences of those two situations. But we as orthodontists have drawn biologic conclusions as a result of our observations of the arch wire. With a SmartArch, we can achieve molar movement, and I have seen, as have other clinicians reported, that leveling is occurring faster. One of the things that I've observed is an unraveling of teeth in a more favorable direction. Uprighting molars helps direct anterior teeth. So we can now go back and consider, without moving the molars, what are we fighting with the anterior teeth and how is it slowing us down? I start every single fixed case with SmartArch because of these reasons. We are going to save appointments, wires, and overall time, so the financial investment is minimal compared to the consistent return. Ormco's research team determined the average root surface area of each tooth and calculated the optimal force to move the tooth based on that area. The ideal force to move a maxillary incisor will always be that same force level because the root surface, hopefully, of a tooth is a constant. So I will use an 1825 SmartArch where alignment will tolerate placement as it has the same individual force levels as the 016 SmartArch. I found this very handy in those cases with impacted cuspids that were missed. The dentition looks fairly normal, but there's some transverse problems and minor irregularities. Getting into an 1825 right away means we can expose the tooth and activate it that much sooner. Routine cases can progress even faster when a rectangular arch wire is the starting wire. I made this same point in webinar 1, but it bears repeating. If we override the force level on just one tooth, the tooth will act temporarily as an ankylosed tooth while the lag phase occurs. Ankylosed teeth distort the arch form and affect adjacent teeth. And why the blocked out cuspid example? Well, let's look at one. Blocked out cuspids happen all the time, and we know that when we engage a high cuspid, it can create an occlusal cant quite easily. Well, take a look at our situation now with SmartArch. Without any elastic forces, we have a resolution of the vertical discrepancy without any undesirable side effects. These two pictures are taken 10 weeks apart. T1 is the day the braces are placed. These are Insignia custom SL brackets, SL self-ligating, and T2 is 10 weeks later with no elastics. There's no friction here either, so just a sidebar, this won't happen with ligated twin brackets. Molars matter. After having set up almost 3,500 digitally fixed cases, I believe that mandibular molars are drivers of malocclusion, and we need to pay more attention to these big bullies. Molar movement is dynamic. As we move the molars, we will create space with which to better position and align anterior teeth. How is that better done than right from the start when we need the space the most? Let's look at a case I just recently saw back in my clinic. This wonderful little girl presented to my clinic, and I know that many orthodontists would immediately regard this as an extraction case. I went through a Roth-Williams MBT education 20 years ago and probably would not have hesitated. This is her initial bonding. I have chosen to bypass the mandibular right central incisor, as we cannot use finger pressure to close the door and engage the wire, which is the standard measure for whether or not to engage a tooth in my clinic. I have disarticulated the bite with band lock on the occlusal of the maxillary sixes and have prescribed the patient class 3 elastics from the upper first molar to the lower first bicuspids full time. I would love to be able to see how many people would balk at this entirely, but do not attempt this unless you are in passive self-ligation. This would not work with twin brackets, but that is a system deficiency, not a biological necessity. Now here is the patient at our first adjustment in 16 weeks. Her midlines are on, her cuspids are descending and aligning, her overbite is maintained, periodontally we are improving. And I would like you to consider that if this girl walked into your office, would you remove 4 teeth? This is the patient after 16 weeks of alignment with SmartArch. Take a look at the leveling here. Look at the levels initially and the relationships between the cuspids and first bicuspids in particular. Look at the torque changes in the posterior from uprighting, the incredible space creation and efficacy of this case. This is SmartArch 101. But is an arch wire going to solve your case? Is it going to turn an extraction decision into a simplified non-extraction case? No. I just said that the appliance I used is a passive self-ligation appliance, so there's no friction. But if the appliances are not applied correctly, or if class 2 elastics were prescribed instead of class 3s, we would be looking at something quite different. The arch wire doesn't make you a better orthodontist. It allows for better force expression to occur. My advice on elastics is to use initial light elastic forces based on the desired occlusal plane changes related to the mandibular first molar that you would like to see. I rarely prescribe early light class 2 elastics. Most mandibular molars are tipped mesially at the beginning of a malocclusion. This is a really incredible transformation of this case. In one arch wire, we see the almost complete elimination of crowding and a tight buccal occlusion developing. My guess is that if the first bicuspids were extracted here, the case would not be looking this close to completion at 16 weeks, as the unfavorably angled roots on the maxillary and mandibular cuspids would take a very long time to recover from, if ever, once the crowns tipped further distally into extraction spaces. Look again at this coupling that is occurring and the vertical discrepancies resolving. Look at the periodontal situation on the upper left lateral incisor. So much better already. Her teeth are also looking well in her face. Using her forehead line to guide us, we can see her mid-face deficiency is improving. Her midlines are becoming coincident. So even with all those jumbled up teeth, her crowding starting out asymmetric, but unraveling so that we end up with symmetry. These are all positive aspects. Now, in this picture, we have to level further with our 1825 and then finish our smile arc and wear some vertical elastics, but we have an easy version now. So here is the maxillary arch, and this is it on the day of bonding with an 016 Smart Arch in place. I have placed lingual buttons with power chain to help derotate the maxillary first bicuspids. Remember, these are two rooted teeth. The power chain will also help counter any rotational effects of the class 3 elastic to the maxillary first molars. The band lock also counteracts any vertical eruption of the maxillary first molars. This is the first adjustment at 16 weeks, and I have just placed an 1825 Smart Arch in the maxillary arch. I've removed the buttons and the band lock. If we look closely, note that the upper right cuspid was more blocked out than the left, and the maxillary midline was skewed to the right side. At 16 weeks, symmetry is being expressed. Look at the palatal tissues of the maxillary cuspids. Those cuspids have moved down and palatally. They are still rotated slightly, but the 1825 will work that out beautifully. I think this sort of progression is remarkable. Don't be deceived. Smart Arch is quite malleable, and it won't spring back into an ideal arch form when it is removed from a crowded arch. So don't jump to the conclusion that it is damaged or not working. Reform it and reinsert it. It is still working. Let's look at the lower arch. It wasn't as crowded, but the lower right central incisor was completely blocked out, and here I've chosen to open coil space for it. But again, look at the symmetry that is developing with the leveling of the posterior teeth. There was more crowding in the fourth quadrant compared to the third. I did not advance the arch bar in the lower arch because I will use it next time to engage the central incisor. Instead, I activated the tooth with a power chain to rotate it. I'm still having the patient continue her class 3 elastics at nighttime to support uprighting the mandibular cuspids. But after only 16 weeks with Smart Arch, the moderate crowding we see is significantly reduced. My rule of thumb is just that. If your thumb can't seat the arch wire and close the door, use a coil. There are minimal side effects to this sort of engagement in a passive self-ligation system with accurate bracket placement and properly prescribed early light elastics. And let's not forget patient compliance. But it is possible and predictable. So when teeth are moving continuously and simultaneously, I think that there is an added benefit that nature capitalizes on, and that is function driving a better initial resolution to the malocclusion than if greater arching coordination existed. This challenges the notion of our traditional understanding of what is required to achieve these movements. If you want to see more clinical examples of Smart Arch in action, tune into part 3 of this webinar series, the new super-elastic multi-force technology and sequence. I'm Dr. Sonia Palick. Thanks for listening, and cheerio.